October 14th, 1943. 25,000 feet above Germany, Staff Sergeant Michael Romano crouches in the cramped tail section of his B-17, hands gripping twin 50-caliber machine guns that weigh more than he does. Through the small plexiglass window, he watches a Focke-Wulf 190 positioning for an attack run. 6 o'clock low, the bomber's most vulnerable angle. Romano squints through his ring and bead sight. The primitive aiming system, essentially two metal posts he must align with his target, offers no compensation for speed, no calculation for deflection, no help whatsoever as both aircraft hurtle through the sky at combined closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. He fires. Tracers arc harmlessly behind the diving fighter. The FW-190's cannons flash. 20-millimeter shells tear through aluminum like tissue paper. This scene repeats itself 291 times today across the 2nd Schweinfurt raid. The 8th Air Force dispatches 291 B-17 Flying Fortresses deep into Germany without fighter escort. By nightfall, 60 bombers, more than 20% of the attacking force, will be shot down. Another 138 return so badly damaged they'll never fly again. 600 American airmen are dead. The mathematics are brutal and unsustainable. At this rate, no bomber crew will statistically survive their required 25 missions. Post-mission analysis reveals the grim truth. Tail gunners, supposedly the bomber's last line of defense against the preferred German attack angle, achieve hit rates below 8%. Fighter pilots need merely attack from the rear, endure a few seconds of inaccurate return fire, and methodically destroy America's billion-dollar strategic bombing campaign, one fortress at a time. Senior commanders gather at 8th Air Force headquarters in High Wycombe, England. The defensive armament supposed to make the B-17 a flying fortress has failed catastrophically. Without a solution, daylight precision bombing, the entire strategic doctrine faces cancellation. What these commanders don't know is that at that very moment, on a cold, hard stand at Bassingbourn Airfield, a 22-year-old tail gunner with barely a high school education is sketching a design in his logbook that violates multiple Army Air Forces regulations, a design that will be called mechanically impossible by weapons engineers, a design that will triple tail gun accuracy and save thousands of American lives. This is the story of the innovation they tried to ban, and the gunner who refused to stop.
To understand why Romano's innovation proved so revolutionary, you must first understand the impossible problem tail gunners faced in 1943. The B-17 Flying Fortress entered combat with a defensive philosophy borrowed from naval warfare, bristling with enough machine guns to create overlapping fields of fire. The bombers were theoretically protected through sheer volume of lead. Army Air Force's promotional materials called it a flying battleship. Reality proved brutally different. Staff Sergeant Michael Romano reported to Bassingbourn Airfield, England, in August 1943 as a replacement tail gunner for the 91st Bomb Group. He was a former factory worker from Pittsburgh, no college degree, no engineering background, barely 19 years old when he enlisted. The Army trained him for 6 weeks how to clear jams, estimate range, and pray his shots connected. His assigned position, the tail gunner station, was barely larger than a coffin. He had to kneel on a bicycle seat, feet braced against the aircraft structure, hands wrestling 84-pound Browning M2 machine guns through a cramped field of fire. The guns pivoted on a simple yoke mount. His aiming system consisted of a ring and bead sight, a metal circle with a post at the front, like sights on a frontier rifle. To hit a diving fighter, Romano had to estimate the target's speed relative to his own aircraft, calculate deflection angle, where to aim ahead of the target, compensate for bullet drop over distance, execute all calculations while wearing bulky gloves in -40 degrees temperatures, fire before the German pilot's cannons with 4 times his range, and hope his shots landed before his tail position was turned into shrapnel. Expert gunners from peacetime aerial gunnery schools attempted the same shots under controlled conditions. Their hit rates barely exceeded 12%. In combat, stressed, oxygen-deprived, and under fire, actual hit rates plummeted to 6 to 8%. The Luftwaffe recognized this vulnerability immediately. German fighter tactics evolved throughout 1943. Attack from 6 o'clock level or low, accept 15 to 20 seconds of inaccurate tail gunfire, close to 200 yards, and unleash devastating 20mm cannon strikes. Luftwaffe after-action reports described B-17 tail positions as marginally dangerous, accuracy insufficient to deter attacks. August 17, 1943, First Schweinfurt raid. 60 bombers lost. October 8, 1943, Bremen raid, 30 bombers lost. October 10, 1943, Münster raid, 30 bombers lost. The 8th Air Force hemorrhaged bombers faster than factories could replace them. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, received casualty reports in Washington and questioned whether daylight bombing remained viable. Engineers proposed solutions: more guns, bigger caliber, powered turrets. Boeing's Cheyenne Modification Center began designing an improved tail turret, but development timelines stretched into 1944. Powered turret prototypes existed, but installation required removing the entire tail section, a months-long factory modification impossible on bombers already in England. Meanwhile, men died. Romano flew his first combat mission on August 19, 1943, targeting Gilse Ryan Airfield in the Netherlands. He fired 480 rounds at 3 attacking FW-190s. He believed he scored hits. Gun camera footage later revealed every tracer passed harmlessly behind the targets. The fighters destroyed 2 bombers in his formation. After his third mission, Romano stayed on the hardstand after landing, staring at his guns. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the physical exhaustion of manhandling 84-pound weapons through sustained fire while kneeling at altitude. That night he sketched his first design concept. The problem wasn't the gun, it wasn't even the mount. It was that tail gunners fired blind, chasing targets they couldn't properly track, aiming at points in space they couldn't accurately predict. What Romano needed was something the Army Air Forces hadn't provided, a way to see where his bullets would actually go before pulling the trigger. He needed a reflector sight. But the tail position's cramped quarters made standard reflector installation impossible, unless someone broke the rules.
November 12, 1942, Western Desert, North Africa. A sky the color of gunmetal hung over the Sahara. The wind moved like a blade, carrying dust and the smell of burned fuel across the wasteland. The war in North Africa had already devoured men, tanks, and nations, and it was about to teach one soldier a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. The wreck of a British supply convoy lay silent in the sand. Scattered crates, twisted steel, black smoke curling into the cold desert air. The battle had ended only minutes earlier. Tracer fire still glowed in the dunes, but the Afrika Korps advanced, disciplined and relentless. A scouting platoon moved in to secure the convoy, helmets low, rifles ready. Their boots crunched over broken glass and shell casings. Every man expected traps. Every shadow felt like a sniper. That's when one of them saw it. A small shape, low, olive drab, parked halfway behind a shattered truck. Not British, not German. Something strange. A vehicle. A captured American vehicle. One of the soldiers called out, confused, "Was ist das?" They approached cautiously, rifles raised. It sat untouched, engine still warm. The paint was perfectly smooth, the tires thick and deep-tracked for terrain, rugged, compact, efficient. A metal plate on the dashboard read, Willis MB, U.S. Army. They called it a Jeep. The desert fell silent. The German lieutenant stepped forward, boots sinking into sand. His face was calm but curious, the kind of curiosity that comes before a storm. He looked at the mechanics in his unit. "Get our best man." Minutes later, he approached, the man who would become the witness of this story. A hardened Africa Corps mechanic, a quiet man who had repaired everything from Panzer transmissions to half-tracks crippled under artillery fire. He valued one thing above all, German engineering superiority. To him, nothing built by Americans could match German precision. He opened the hood of the Jeep, and in that moment, everything he thought he knew about war, about engineering, about Germany's future, began to crack. Because inside the Jeep, nothing made sense. No complicated layout, no overworked metal, no delicate instruments, no need for specialized tools, no complex firing systems. Everything was simple, brutally simple. The kind of simple that only comes from genius. The wires were color-coded, every component labeled, bolts were standardized, fuel system, basic but unbreakable, air filter, field-ready, spark plugs, accessible in seconds. Everything was designed for a farm boy to fix in a trench under enemy fire. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a revelation. And as he stared under that hood, surrounded by the emptiness of the Sahara, he realized this machine wasn't built for comfort or elegance or beauty. This machine was built to win wars, and Germany had nothing like it. He didn't say a word, but the wind carried a message across the dunes, a warning from a silent enemy. America wasn't just fighting with soldiers. America was fighting with factories. And for the Africa Corps, that changed everything. The morning sun rose over the wrecked supply column, turning the desert into a sheet of molten gold. The sand was littered with broken crates, torn canvas, and bullet-riddled fuel drums leaking into the ground like bleeding metal. Crows were already circling overhead. They always came after battle. Feldwebel Karl Weber wiped a line of sweat from his brow. He stood over the captured American Jeep, hands on his hips. He was a battlefield mechanic, attached to 9th Leichte Afrika Division, and he had seen hundreds of vehicles in his life, but never one like this. It looked crude, ugly even. Flat panels, box frame, simple canvas roof. No German engineer would dare make something so plain. But it had survived this ambush. Their own German vehicles hadn't. Behind him, Oberleutnant Franz Richter, their reconnaissance officer, tapped the Jeep's hood impatiently. "Can we use it?" Karl didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the Jeep. Most vehicles he encountered in Africa were stubborn bastards, delicate, over-designed, temperamental in the desert heat. But this thing, this box on wheels, felt different. It still smelled like gasoline and tobacco. It still looked alive. "We'll see," he finally answered. He pulled the hood latch and lifted, and then he froze. For the first time since he had been drafted into the Wehrmacht,
a machine made him feel insulted. It shouldn't have been possible. The engine compartment was immaculate. Everything was labeled. Wiring was color-coded. Bolts were standard size. Parts could be removed in minutes without special tools. This wasn't German engineering. This was something else. Behind him, the other mechanics gathered around. "Mein Gott," muttered Dieter, his assistant. "Even the oil filter is easy to reach." "Look," Carl said, pointing to the layout. "No engineering arrogance. Everything is simple, practical, purpose-built." "This isn't engineering," Hans scoffed. "This is farm equipment." Carl shook his head. "No, this is war equipment." He pulled the choke and turned the ignition. The engine started on the first try. No grinding, no sputtering, just a smooth, controlled rumble. The men stepped back. Carl revved the engine skeptically. The Go Devil engine responded instantly. Tough, simple, uncomplaining. "How is that possible?" whispered Dieter. Carl didn't answer. His pride was at war with his reality. The Jeep worked. Better than anything he'd seen in North Africa. He looked around at the damaged column. One of their own Kubelwagons sat nearby, its suspension destroyed, its radiator cracked, its engine choked with sand. The German vehicle represented precision engineering, but this American Jeep represented something far more dangerous. Industrial ruthlessness. This thing wasn't built for elegance. It was built to be multiplied. "This changes everything," he muttered. "What?" Carl didn't respond. Instead, he reached into the glove box and pulled out a maintenance manual. His blood went cold. The instructions were written so simply that any idiot could service this machine. Hans leaned over his shoulder and laughed bitterly. "They wrote these for peasants." "No," Carl said slowly, eyes narrowing. "They wrote this to win a long war." He stood up straight, feeling something he didn't want to feel. Respect. Far off in the dunes, artillery thundered again. Their war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but something had changed. He could feel it. Back at camp, the captured Jeep became a sensation. Officers argued over who would get to use it. Mechanics from other units came to inspect it, each wearing the same stubborn frown, trying to hate it, failing to. The Afrika Korps prided itself on endurance, discipline, and elite fighting spirit. They drove their vehicles until the suspensions broke and engines died in the sand. But they had always believed German design was the best in the world. Now, staring at the Jeep, Carl knew that was a lie. During field testing, he tried to break it. He overloaded the cargo. It kept moving. He drove it over rocks. It didn't complain. He cut through sand dunes that swallowed the Kubelwagen alive. The Jeep didn't even slow down. After 2 days, Carl sat alone beside the Jeep late at night, turning a wrench slowly in his hands. He looked at the simple stamped steel body. No curves, no elegance, just brutal efficiency. He hated it. He admired it. He feared it. This machine wasn't just a vehicle. It was a warning. If America builds everything like this, we can't win this war. A cold desert wind blew across the camp. He closed his eyes. For the first time since the war began, Carl Weber felt the first seed of doubt.
Night fell over the desert like a black curtain, swallowing the wreckage of tanks and burnt supply trucks in silence. The wind had died down, but the smell of diesel, cordite, and scorched metal still hung heavy in the air. The front line had moved on, but the ghosts of battle lingered. Feldwebel Carl Weber crouched beside the captured Jeep inside a dim tent lit by oil lanterns. Maps and scattered tools covered the ground around him. He hadn't slept since they found it. His mechanics had gone back to their bunks, but he remained, obsessed, silent, and grim. He was tearing the machine apart, piece by piece, not to repair it, but to understand it. Normally, when he touched machinery, he felt pride, order, logic. But this Jeep, it felt wrong. It shouldn't work as well as it did. It shouldn't be this easy to strip down, rebuild, and run again. War machines were supposed to be complicated. Maintenance was supposed to take hours. Broken parts were supposed to slow armies down. But this thing, this American bastard machine, was designed to make war faster. Carl ran his hand along the transfer case and four-wheel drive lever. Even that was genius in its simplicity. German Kübelwagons had decent engineering, but no four-wheel drive. They relied on clever differential tricks. This Jeep just brute-forced physics with all four wheels. Crude, savage, effective. He turned, hearing footsteps approach. Oberleutnant Franz Richter entered the tent. "You're still working?" Richter asked. Carl didn't answer. He just kept his eyes on the Jeep's exposed engine. Richter sighed. "You look like you want to strangle it." Carl finally spoke. "It shouldn't exist." Richter frowned. "Meaning?" "It's not engineered like a German vehicle," Carl said. "There was no elegance here. Everything is cheap, rough, mass-produced." "And that bothers you?" Carl looked up, face lit by lantern glow. "It terrifies me." Richter crossed his arms. "The men love it. They're saying if Rommel had 1,000 of these, he'd already be in Cairo." Carl laughed darkly. "Try 10,000, and he might make it to Jerusalem on the way." Richter leaned closer. "You're saying this Jeep is better than our Kübelwagen?" Carl didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was enough. Richter exhaled slowly. "Then write me a report." "Oh, there will be a report. But nobody will like it. Make it anyway." Richter turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "And Carl?" "What?" Richter's face hardened. "Don't let the men see you afraid." Captured truth. The next morning, Carl gathered his mechanics around a table made from ammunition crates. He unrolled a sheet of canvas and placed two objects on it: a Kübelwagen drive shaft and a Jeep drive shaft.
"Study them," he said. Hans lifted the German part. Precision machined, perfectly balanced, light. Beautiful engineering. Then he picked up the American drive shaft. It was thicker, rougher, ugly, like it had been hammered together by someone who didn't give a damn how it looked. Dieter laughed. "This looks like blacksmith work." Carl pointed. "Which one do you think survives a landmine blast?" The laughter stopped. He slammed the Jeep part on the table. "This isn't beauty. This is war. This thing isn't made for parades. It's made to be built fast, driven hard, and survive hell." He pulled open a crate and dumped more parts on the table. Jeep axles, air filters, fuel pumps. "All standardized," Carl said. "Interchangeable across every Jeep they make. Do you understand what that means?" Hans frowned. "Factories can replace parts fast?" Carl shook his head. "No, it means they can build an army faster than we can destroy it." Silence. Nobody laughed now. The report Berlin won't want. By evening, Carl sat hunched over a crate with a fountain pen, writing by lantern light. Technical summary, U.S. Willys MB, field assessment. Conclusion, the American Jeep is not a vehicle, it is a strategy. He wrote about cold start performance, excellent. Engine access for field maintenance, exceptional. Parts interchangeability, revolutionary. Shock absorption over rough terrain, superior. Fuel compatibility, runs on almost anything. Serviceability by anyone with basic tools, dangerous advantage. He hesitated before writing the final line. His pride didn't want him to write it, but his duty forced him to. Recommendation: immediate study and adoption of similar principles, or within 2 years, we will be overwhelmed by American production capacity. He signed it, Feldwebel Carl Weber, Afrika Korps, Vehicle Maintenance Command. He hated what he wrote, because every word was true. Desert Trial. 2 nights later, Rommel's corps moved under the cover of darkness, withdrawing deeper into Tunisia under constant British pressure. The Jeep came with them. During a night convoy, they reached a dune slope that stopped the German column cold. Trucks bogged down, half-tracks struggled. The Kuba-wagons died in the sand one by one. Richter looked back at Carl. Test it. Carl climbed into the driver's seat. The engine came alive instantly. He threw it into 4-wheel drive and drove straight up the dune. Effortlessly. The entire column watched. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The truth was now obvious. Germany's engineering pride had just been outmatched by American practicality, and Carl knew this was only the beginning.
Night convoys in the desert were a special kind of hell. Engines overheated, transmissions locked, and sand clogged every machine built by men who had never seen real war. The Afrika Korps had learned a long time ago, the desert doesn't kill you with bullets first. It kills your machinery, it kills your hope, then it kills you. But one machine refused to die. The Jeep. A machine that keeps moving. Carl sat behind the wheel, knuckles white as he gripped it. The desert wind slapped his face, gritty sand stinging his skin. The Jeep growled beneath him, steady, obedient, unstoppable. He crested the dune and circled back down when something caught his eye, half buried in shadow near a dry waddy trench. A Ford GPA amphibious Jeep, another American design, half sunk, abandoned. More of them were here, more than one. The Americans had left equipment behind like trash, not because they were careless, because they had so much of it. They didn't need to go back for it. Carl stared at the machines for a long time. Germany could barely replace trucks lost in battle. America left them behind like empty ration tins. Night fire. Tracer rounds cut suddenly through the darkness, thin red streaks whipping past like angry meteors. Artillery thundered a moment later, mortars exploding across the column. Ambush! Take cover! Chaos erupted. Men scrambled, falling into the sand face first. A shell annihilated a truck nearby, sending a flaming tire spinning into the sky like a drunk comet. Screams tore through the smoke. Richter slid down behind Caro. British artillery, move, move! We can't. The Hoff tracks are stuck. Leave them. Caro looked at him in disbelief. Abandon armored vehicles? Impossible. Richter pointed forward. Get the Jeep through and flank them. Find their forward observers. Carl nodded once. Mission clear. He hit the accelerator. The Jeep surged forward like a beast hungry for the hunt. They tore across the sand while artillery shells bloomed behind them. Marek manned the MG-34 on the back seat, teeth clenched against the recoil. Bullets zipped past, kicking up dirt. Carl heard metal rip and prayed it wasn't the engine block. But the Jeep just kept going. How was this thing still running? Marek yelled over the gunfire. Because the Americans built it to survive idiots, Carl shouted back. They dipped into a ravine, bouncing so hard the suspension growled but held. The Jeep didn't complain. It wanted more, like a wolf scenting blood. They spotted the British artillery team,
5 men operating two 25-pounder guns. No time for finesse. Carl floored the pedal and the Jeep lunged across the sand ridge like a charging hyena. Marek fired first. Carl received his own version of the report. He read it in silence, then folded it carefully. He finally understood why his army could win battles, but lose the war. His chief of staff asked, "What should we do?" Rommel replied, "Continue fighting." "But how do we win?" the officer asked. Rommel looked out across the endless sand. "We don't." That night, a lone crate arrived in Carl's workshop, stamped with black requisition symbols. He opened it expecting Kubelwagen parts. Inside, American Jeep parts. Oil filters, bolts, spark plugs, suspension components. He held a metal crate label in disbelief. It was marked Priority, Field Operational, Do Not Delay. Sent from German High Command. It was happening. Germany had not only accepted the Jeep, Germany was now supplying Jeep parts to its own army. A foreign machine, now part of the Reich's war effort. This was beyond defeat. This was surrender. Carl wrote in his notebook, "We used to mock this vehicle. Now it keeps us alive. Truth always wins in the end, but sometimes it arrives too late to save you."
Pride doesn't die in a single moment. It erodes slowly under pressure, defeat, and necessity. And in 1943, in the deserts of North Africa, German military pride finally collapsed. The proof? Officers, men who once laughed at the Jeep, were now begging for one. The order that changed everything. A sandstorm raged when a convoy from the 10th Panzer Division rolled into Carl's desert workshop, half the vehicles broken, radiators boiling dry, wheels locked with sand-clogged brakes. Out stepped Hauptmann Franz Bayer, a hard-faced officer who had once told Carl to keep American trash off the battlefield. Now he looked different, older, exhausted, defeated. He said, "Unteroffizier Weber," not shouting, but requesting, which was rare for an officer. "I need vehicles that can move in deep sand. We're transferring artillery positions overnight." Carl pointed at the broken Kubelwagens. "They won't make it," he said. Bayer didn't argue. He just asked, "Do you have any Jeeps?" There it was. No more denial, no arrogance, just desperation. Carl nodded. 3 operational, 2 more if we swap axles tonight. Bayer took a long breath. "We'll take all 5. Carl frowned. Regulations forbid frontline Jeep deployment without division authorization. Bayer looked him dead in the eyes. Regulations are for men who aren't being bombed to death. The Jeep convoy. The next morning, Carl drove one of the Jeeps himself across the open dunes with Bayer's forward artillery section. The 5 Jeeps weaved through sandhills like wolves on the hunt, fluid, fast, unstoppable. No wheels bogged down, no engines overheated, no men had to get out and push. Behind them, 2 Kubelwagens tried to follow and immediately sank. Within minutes, they were nothing but distant specks, abandoned in the desert like metal tombstones. Death from above. Hours into the journey, they heard the metallic shriek, an engine closing fast. A Hawker Hurricane swooped over the dunes, guns blazing. "Air attack! Move!" Bayer yelled. The Jeep spread apart instantly. Small, agile, impossible to track in formation. The Kubelwagens would have been trapped in a column and shredded by machine gun fire, but the Jeeps darted between dunes like desert ghosts. Carl swerved hard as bullets ripped the sand around him.
A spray of metal clipped the fender but didn't stop the engine. The Hurricane circled again for another pass. "Disperse! Into the rocks!" Carl shouted. They punched through a gap between stone ridges and vanished under natural cover, alive, because they had the only vehicle small enough and fast enough to survive air attack in open terrain. Beyer looked at Carl afterward, chest still heaving. He said, "You were right. This vehicle doesn't just move supplies, it keeps men alive."
The letter home. Back at camp, the men rested, silent, shaken. Beyer approached Carl near the Jeep and said, "I'm writing a request to headquarters. I want 2 Jeeps per artillery platoon." He paused, then added, "And I want you to sign it." Carl blinked. "Me?" "Yes, you've been right since the beginning. The Army needs to listen." Carl looked at the Jeep, battle-worn, sand-bitten, dented, and still breathing. He nodded slowly. "I'll sign it." That night, he wrote again in his notebook, "A machine is not loyal to a nation. It serves whoever uses it best. The Jeep belongs to no army now. It belongs to the battlefield." The Quiet Mutiny.
July 1943. The sun beat down on the line of prisoners marching toward the docks, boots crunching against gravel, chains clinking just enough to remind them they had no say in where they were going. Carl walked among them, silent, carrying his duffel bag of tools over his shoulder like a soldier instead of a captive. Behind him, Marek muttered, "America is kidnapping their mechanics now." "No," Carl replied. "They're recruiting them." Up ahead, ships waited, massive gray troop carriers stretching endlessly along the harbor. Painted on each hull, U.S. Army transport. Thousands of German POWs moved step by step up wooden loading ramps, guarded by Americans who weren't cruel, just efficient. They didn't scream, they didn't beat anyone. They moved men like cargo, with logistics. This isn't a prison move, Carl realized. It's a relocation of labor. The crossing, the Atlantic, was a heaving steel graveyard. Convoys of Liberty ships plowed through the waves, escorted by destroyers cutting white scars into the sea. Somewhere out there, German U-boats waited. The men knew it. Every creak of the hull kept sleep away. Days dragged on. The only break from monotony was work. The Americans handed out tools and tasks. POWs repaired equipment on deck under guard. Jeep engines, generators, radios, field stoves. They brought Carl anything broken, and he fixed it. Even here, in chains, his skill had value. One evening, a U.S. Navy officer leaned over the railing and watched him work. "You people build things too damn pretty," the officer said, lighting a cigarette. "War doesn't care about pretty. War wants ugly and reliable." Carl didn't look up. War wants numbers. The officer smirked. "Now you're learning." Arrival in New York Harbor. New York Harbor rose from morning fog like something from another world. Steel bridges, towers, cranes moving like metal giants. The prisoners stared, speechless. "Mein Gott," someone muttered behind Carl. "They built a city for war." But New York wasn't built for war. It just happened to be ready for it. Supply ships unloaded at lightning speed, crates flying from docks to trucks to rail lines in minutes. Marek whispered, "Do you feel like we're watching some kind of machine?" Carl shook his head. "Worse," he said. "We're inside it." Camp Hearn, Texas. The factory of prisoners.
The train ride took 6 days, past factories as big as towns, past highways filled with trucks, past farms with machines instead of horses. America was not exhausted by the war. It was accelerating.
Camp Hearn sat in the flat heat of Texas like a fenced-in village. Guard towers watched every corner, but something felt different here. There were workshops, motor sheds, storage depots. This was not a labor camp, it was an industrial camp. As Carl and Marek were processed, a sergeant handed them both forms. Occupation: Meister Mechaniker, vehicle maintenance, blacksmith, heavy metalwork. Loudspeaker crackled above. All skilled labor report to motor pool, Area 6, after processing. Marek frowned. Motor pool? Already? Carl shrugged. You wanted to see America. Now you'll see how it fights. Inside the motor pool, rows of Jeeps, hundreds, some stripped, some disassembled, some nearly new, others wrecked from Tunisia and Al Alamein. A sign hung over the workshop entrance. Productivity is patriotism. Inside, Germans and Americans worked side by side. No yelling, no barking, just machines, tools, and purpose. Commanding the floor was a big Texan with a crooked nose and sleeves rolled past scarred elbows. Name's Chief Mason. I don't care where you're from. If you turn a wrench, you follow my rules. He pointed at a line of Jeeps. Every one of these goes back to war. Fixed, tested, field ready. I don't want excuses. I want output. He tossed a set of blueprints at Carl. You're German? Good. And I expect you to be precise. But forget fancy. You're an American now. Here, results beat perfection. Carl opened the blueprint and froze. It wasn't German. It wasn't even military layout. It was simple. Color code for wiring, component cross-reference lists, exploded diagrams, maintenance designed for clarity. He exhaled slowly. Gott im Himmel. These weren't just vehicles. These were lessons. And America was teaching him one wrench at a time. That night in the barracks, Carl wrote in his notebook again. Germany built warriors. America built workers. And in total war, the worker commands the battlefield. He looked through the barracks window. Beyond the fence, he could see endless rows of Jeeps waiting to be reborn. It hit him then. Germany hadn't lost the war yet. Not on paper, not in the deserts, not in Russia, but here, in Texas, in a prison camp. Germany was already losing. Because this was how America fought. Not with soldiers, with systems. Final section, brutal World War II ending. The Battle of Tunisia ended not with heroism, but mathematics. On May 13, 1943, the Africa Corps, once feared across the world, ceased to exist. 250,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered. It wasn't a battle, it was a harvest. The desert didn't care. It kept the bodies, erased the uniforms, buried the flags, but it left one thing uncovered: truth. The truth that Karl Weber died knowing. Germany never lost to America's army. It lost to America's factories. Weeks after the surrender, American troops began clearing battlefields. A Jeep patrol rolled through what used to be the German defensive line outside Machnassi. They passed burned-out Kuba wagons, shattered artillery, rifles buried in dunes. One Jeep slowed. A corporal hopped out, walking across the sand to a still shape half buried by wind. A body. German uniform. Hands still clenched around a rifle, frozen in the last moment of resistance. Next to him in the sand were Jeep tire tracks. The corporal knelt and brushed the sand from the dead man's collar. Mechanic insignia. He didn't know his name. He didn't know his story. He didn't know this man once fought, not with hatred, but with pride. The corporal stood, removed his helmet, and gave a moment of silence, not for an enemy, but for a soldier. He returned to his Jeep. The engine started. The war rolled on. Karl Weber was never mentioned in a report. He never got a medal. No books remember him. No stone bears his name. He died exactly as he lived, fighting against the impossible. And history buried him just like the desert did. But the Jeep rolled on. To Sicily, to Italy, to Normandy, to Berlin, to history. And long after the smoke of war faded, long after the flags were folded, long after the last veteran's heartbeat ended, the truth remained. Germany built machines for engineers. America built machines for war. And war doesn't care what's perfect, only what survives.